English translation 923rd contact Saturday, December 27th, 2025, 12:41 hours.
Greetings, dear friend, but it is not possible for me to do otherwise, for I have to take you away for some time today, though I will bring you back at the same time I take you away now. But this is necessary because...
It is all right. I'm a bit unwell though because... I suppose I cannot do anything about that, because... But it will be all right if I pull myself together a bit.
Then, I can...
No. I do not want to do that. Because...
Of course, then we should go, because we are expected.
Okay. Let us hit the road then.
We can also have a private conversation there then, after which I will bring you back at the present time.
That is also good. Let us go now then. Now that we are back, and we know that the man has died, and his written estate has been burned,
Of course, I will endeavor for that to dictate our copy to you, which I will do as soon as possible.
Good, thank you. Then we can talk about other things now, because I have one more question, and I want to ask it first, because someone cannot get to grips with the fact that the refugees who were recently taken in by your Federation came from a galaxy just over 4,600 or so light-years away. It apparently cannot be understood that another galaxy should not be millions of light-years away from the next one, such as our Milky Way galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy, which are about 2.5 million light-years apart. People do not realize that galaxies do not necessarily have to be millions or even billions of light-years apart. As I know, there are many small galaxies that are relatively very close, and only about 130 light-years apart, as I was able to determine with Svath when he showed me this, on screens in the Yankar universe. So I know that your galaxy is also a spiral galaxy, but a completely different one to ours. Yours has 2 spiral arms, but, unlike our galaxy, they extend from the center of the galaxy on both sides, whereby your solar system is located in one of the spiral arms, which, together with the center of the galaxy in the other spiral arm, has a diameter or total length of just over 400 light-years, if I remember correctly what your grandfather taught me. On both sides of your galaxy, the center of which is only about 30 light-years across, I remember, with one small galaxy on each side of the galaxy many light-years across, and your 2 small galaxies exist in the closer region of your galaxy. If I now think that small galaxies also exist outside our Milky Way, which to my knowledge is calculated to be around 106,000 light-years in diameter, then it is also possible that if one of these, or one of the planets is destroyed, or something, and also carries life, such as human or human-like life, that they will then flee, and seek help in the nearest galaxy, and possibly find it, if they are lucky, and then come across similar species etc. there. As I also know from Svath, small galaxies are also bound to our Milky Way, to my knowledge about 55 or more of them, which are gravitationally bound to our spiral Milky Way, and so it is clear that there are not millions and billions of light-years of distance between one galaxy and another, as is the case between the Milky Way galaxy and the large Andromeda galaxy. In our Duran universe and explicitly outside the Milky Way, galaxies are also gravitationally bound, although I do not know how far away they are. These are only small galaxies, but they are galaxies, and as far as I know there are probably trillions or even quadrillions of them in the entire cosmos, and I would also like to say that what we see from Earth in our universe, with regard to the cosmos, is only the least of what effectively exists. Our astronomers also know that these exist. But as far as the galaxies that are still within the gravitational range of our Milky Way are concerned, at a distance of only about 4,600 light-years, none of them are as close as the refugees were. And as I have checked, there really are at least 55 small galaxies in the gravitational field of our Milky Way, such as the spiral galaxy M100, at a distance of 20,000 light-years. The Tucana 3 galaxy, at a distance of around 80,000 light-years, and Draco 3 at 70,000, as well as Virgo at a distance of 30,000 light-years. These are what we Earthlings call satellite galaxies or dwarf galaxies, such as the so-called Wire Galaxy, which is around 27,000 light-years away. The Large Magellanic Clouds, which are around 162,000 light-years away. The Small Magellanic Clouds, which are 220,000 light-years away. Or the Ursa Major Galaxy, which is around 10,000 light-years away. Now the question is whether you can say anything more about this.
You have already explained everything that needs to be said, but it should be added that the dwarf galaxies are extragalactic star systems that rarely support life and are also normally smaller globular clusters between larger galaxies. These small galaxies are faint and also quite numerous in the gravitational range of large galaxies and very often of elliptical, spheroidal, or irregular shapes. They are often companions of large galaxies, as is the case with your Milky Way, and they are formed by intense star formation in early phases of the universe. As a rule, they consist of only hundreds of millions or a few billion stars, that is to say suns, but are correspondingly much smaller than a large galaxy, that is to say also much smaller than your Milky Way galaxy, which has a collection of, according to our calculations, 610 billion stars, that is to say suns, and consequently numerous solar systems with planets and moons, etc. Some small galaxies are only a few light-years or a few thousand light-years in size, but they play a very important role in the formation of stars. And what I have to mention to your question is that it was one of the two small galaxies where the refugees came from.
What you say regarding small galaxies, I know all that, and I also saw with your grandfather's Thoth such dwarf galaxies, which were a class of galaxies that contained only a few 100,000 stars or suns, respectively, and they were very faint and barely visible in the universe. They are actually similar to small globular clusters, which I have also seen, but have very different properties to larger small galaxies, as Thoth explained.
Dwarf galaxies, I know, are called ultralight dwarf galaxies by terrestrial astronomers.
I do not know that, because I do not do much astronomy. I only did it with your grandfather because Thoth said that I should have a basic knowledge of it, so that I could understand this and that, because it was important. For example, I learned from Thoth that dwarf galaxies are the densest star systems in all universes, whereby dwarf galaxies are only a few light-years across at their widest, or can even be less than 10 light-years across at their smallest. I know that our astronomers measure a light-year at 9.4 trillion kilometers.
You do have some knowledge regarding astronomy.
What I have just learned from Thoth, as well as some more from Asked and Semyaze, as well as little from earthly astronomers, who are unfortunately wrong about some things, which I do not want to talk about openly.
Because it would be...
Yes, because the know-it-all, so it would just be like me carrying water into the Rhine, which already has enough flowing in it. But I still have a question.
You said it.
Then I have a question from a Samuel Hertig, who asks me about the so-called world egg, and namely what it is all about, because so much is said about conjecture, but nothing clear comes out of it. So he asks me if I might know more about it, which I really do, and which you also know because, as I know from Thoth, this is part of your basic knowledge. He also wants to know what is to be defined in human beings as the seed of creation consciousness and physical consciousness. I would now like to ask you whether you...
No, you can answer and explain the question just as well.
Whatever you say. But then you have to go a bit further, because as I know, Earthlings have been puzzling over this world egg for a long time and cannot find a solution. Paleontologists in particular, or those who want to be, are up against an impenetrable wall in this respect. But the whole thing is actually easy to explain. For decades now, large and small egg-shaped structures have been found all over the world, which, on the one hand, are ancient and carved out of compacted sand or stone, etc., and on the other hand, are thousands of years old. People involved in UFOlogy and paleontology are particularly interested in this because certain UFOs observed by Earthlings looked egg-shaped. The origin of the many structures now called world eggs because of their shape and which have been found around the world is that they were made thousands of years ago, some of them also involving giant humans who were 230 to 280 centimeters tall, and were distant descendants of the faraway travelers. These were the Goliath, the big people, some of whom were up to 6 meters tall, depending on the race, and to whom Gilgamesh also belonged. The world egg, as it is now called by human beings, actually leads back in terms of meaning to prehistoric times, when the first self-thinking beings became great knowing, but this knowledge was lost even to those who had traveled far away millions of years ago, so that they no longer had any knowledge of the real origin of why the world egg was produced in many cases. The reason for this was many primeval times ago, that only rational beings with conscious awareness named the origin of all existence, and thus all life from a meinosis, or something like that, which in German means egg, which is called Kirkuses or similar, but which expresses something like evenfold.
Excuse me, but the existence is called Myos and the egg is called Kictylus.
Thank you. It has just been about 80 years since Svoth lectured me. Consequently, I do not remember terms and words exactly. But I still know what the terms mean, namely that an egg is sevenfold, and thus consists of more than human beings assume and understand, namely that an egg consists of shell, shell skin, egg white, yolk, and a diverse vitamin complex, creation energy, and creation life energy. Creation is structured in exactly the same way, consisting of 7 universes that exist as a whole as an egg shape, whereby the individual 7 universes each exist in their own dimension, in the same creation space, and are never tangent to each other, due to their different dimensions. And if now the individual universe is to be explained, then this also exists in egg form, and it is divided and structured in sevenfoldness, thus in 7 layers, namely 3 belts before the material belt, the cosmos, and 3 belts after this, so that the cosmos is thus surrounded on the left and right by 6 belts, as it is also half and half encased by the energy belts left and right that reach towards it, which completely enclose it. So the universe egg is to be understood in a similar wise as a normal egg, whereby the material belt, the cosmos, forms the yolk of the universe, so to speak. With regard to the egg, I would like to explain, and I will do so later for everyone who reads the contact report, for which you will then probably dictate everything to me, that.
I will do that, of course.
Of course, but I wanted to say that everything that exists, and so all life is dependent on the egg, even though certain scientists may not know this. Even every blade of grass, and every tiny plant, right down to the beginning of all life, requires the egg for that life to come into being. Even all matter, solid or liquid, is fundamentally the result of an egg. Every existence and therefore every life is founded in its origin, without exception, in an egg, because without an egg, there would be no existence, and therefore, no life. Even the smallest micron in every microbe is founded in its origin, as the tiniest egg, as is also every solid, loose or liquid matter. Now as for the other question that was put to me, and that I am supposed to answer in a conversation with you or the girls, which concerns creation consciousness and physical consciousness, this can actually be answered succinctly by saying that both are stored in the so-called thalamus, in the middle of the life form's brain. The responsible form of creation life energy, and thus also the creation consciousness and its unconscious, are stored in the thalamus, but this also applies to the physical consciousness and its subconscious. I learned all this from Svoth, whose overall knowledge was many times greater and more detailed than that of all the earthling scientists together, who consider themselves great and knowledgeable.
My grandfather was a remarkable man.
You can say that again, and I am honored that he taught me. In fact, I do not know what I would be today without his teachings. But one more question. Do you actually know the size of the center of the sphere on Era? It would be interesting if you could tell me in meters length and height.
I am afraid I do not know, but if you are interested, I can ask for that.
Sure, because there is an interest in it.
Then, I will endeavor to do so.
Thank you.
Then we can now go back to your workroom and continue our conversation there. But it will not be the same time as when I took you away, because we have already passed that time for compliance. But before we go back, I have one more question. We are all interested in how you want to explain peace. Can you define your view and understanding of this for us?
Of course I can. So then I cannot be back to meet Michael, because I told him that at 2:00 hours,
He will understand. Then, I can expect your answer now.
yes, then, I understand peace to mean much more than that there is no war and a certain stable freedom from war, and generally no war violence, because real peace is based on many other values. Peace can only be complete if, among other positive values, there is also absolutely no violence as far as possible, but rather a completely stable absence of violence. If the concept of peace is understood correctly, then it is a concept with very sharp boundaries that must never be exceeded, because in true peace there must never be even an iota of violence, and therefore also no climate of suppressed violence. True peace is a state of absolute nonviolence in thinking, and living in the wise way in this regard, and this is also true for every human being, and in every society. Peace is also the relationship between the observance of justice and the effective reality of truth. Peace is given in a close causal relationship of neutral perception and judgment from a personal point of view, with regard to justice and truth in personal neutral thinking and acting. The realization of real justice, truth, and absolute equality of all human beings, also in their absolutely personal understanding and action in this respect, is a necessary precondition for the realization of stable peace in human beings themselves. And only when this is effectively given, can true personal peace arise, and also be carried forward, whereby social justice and real truth also arise, and every injustice is dealt with, and peace can arise from this. If human beings, or even a small or large society, really find peace in this way, then we can already speak of peace to a large extent. Although this can claim some plausibility, it is ultimately not enough to call this real peace. For firstly, in addition to justice and truth, there are many other factors that effectively determine the stability of peace. Prudence is just as important in constantly checking that everything is really good and that the balance of peace can be maintained. Economic and cultural factors are just as important and must be observed, both in personal behavior and also towards other human beings and society. Justice and truth play an important role, but they are effectively only individual factors alongside various others. Justice and truth really only contribute to the actual development and stability of peace, if the human being is relatively clear and unanimous about what effective justice and truth are, which he or she needs for the development of his or her own peace and that of fellow human beings in society. However, this is precisely what Earth humans of this world do not understand and do not use in conflicts of any kind, because it is always the case in a conflict that peace can hardly or not at all be achieved, because they absolutely do not try to realize a disputed idea of justice and truth. This is because it is not even considered, even though the pursuit of justice and truth are always and in every case linked, and this will always make it difficult or even impossible to achieve peace. Justice and truth are therefore a necessary causal precondition, because in order to really work out and bring about a stable peace, they must be included. In another wise, there is a close connection between peace, justice, and truth. These are always a precondition for the realization of peace, but peace is a value in its own right. From the perspective of necessity, justice and truth are only instrumental values as a means of realizing peace. Justice and truth are not only a precondition for peace, but the latter is, on the contrary, also a precondition for justice and truth. Consequently, all three values are necessary for individual realization, and are therefore interdependent, and together also important for personality and social upswing and prosperity. The human beings in society's natural needs in terms of satisfaction and security, etc., are also dependent on this. So it is by no means the case, even in the slightest wise, that all three values are only means for the realization of peace, justice, and truth, but are values that also have many more purposes and benefits, which fundamentally determine the behavior of human beings, and also their lives. Peace, justice, and truth are values in their own right, but human beings should always keep them in mind for many specific issues, and also for events and occurrences, etc. Peace is much more than just times without war, because it also encompasses the whole of life, which also includes personal effective balance, true love, harmony, joy, happiness, contentment, and the fulfillment of necessary needs, etc. Peace also includes other values. However, peace also includes other values, such as the active promotion of good education and human rights, tolerance and the rule of law, as well as intergovernmental, private and social justice and security for freedom, righteous freedom of speech and freedom of thought, as well as freedom and security for life and limb. To create peace within oneself, there are a number of things that must be taken into account, and I would like to point out what the values and non-values are in this regard. 1. The human being has to learn to create a consistently positive world of thoughts, and to behave accordingly, because it is through his thoughts that he creates his feelings, and, in turn, his emotions. The state of his feelings and emotions means that he is affected by the words, deeds, behavior, and actions, etc. of other human beings through unrestrained and also influencing swinging waves, which unfold their negative or positive effect depending on the positive or negative state of his own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, as well as those penetrating from outside. 2. It is essential for human beings to free themselves from all negative baggage that has become ingrained in their thoughts, feelings, and memories, as this prevents them from absorbing all kinds of positive things, and processing and storing them into good, positive, and valuable things. 3. Physical positive activity of any kind and wise is of urgent necessity, not only to keep the physical function and health in adequate gear, but also to keep the mind active, and to make extensive use of the vitalizing creation energy, and the evolutionary creation life energy, thus counteracting Alzheimer's and dementia. 4. In order to create peace within oneself, it is necessary to eliminate all fears and worries and negative memories that have a negative effect, and to remove them completely from one's thoughts by dissolving them. This means that every time you breathe out, so to speak, you release and forget unpleasant, stressful thoughts and memories. 5. In order to create peace within oneself, it is necessary to practice meditation in such a way as to bring oneself into peaceful tranquility, which is free from stressful thoughts and emotions. 6. The important thing in this meditation is to concentrate on and be aware of your breath, not to allow yourself to be distracted, and also to gently bring your attention back to your body. 7. In order to develop and maintain peace, it is necessary to avoid disputes and conflicts as well as any violence, to conduct conversations in a regulated and considered manner, and to always respect justice and truth, which in the world of conversation always ensure that there is also a state of calm and harmony. Particularly in politics and also in the private sphere, all important aspects of peacemaking are disregarded in peace negotiations, and private attempts to settle disputes out of ignorance of the importance of peace, resulting in protracted, useless, and brainless negotiations without understanding and reason, and no success whatsoever in achieving peace. Peace negotiations and living together in true peacefulness mean that differences and also abilities, as well as views, opinions and also different religions and worldly beliefs are to be accepted, as well as listening to others, thus also recognizing others, respecting them, and also valuing them, as well as living together peacefully and united, and always. And in any case it is announced that a world without hatred and revolt of any kind can never be created with war. War is never a means that leads to true peace. It does not create a world in which human beings can live together harmoniously, regardless of their differences. We therefore live on earth in a world of false peace, which means that we live in countries that do not live in true peace, but in war, peace imposed by war victors. Even if this peace was also achieved several decades, or many centuries ago, through an end to war. Once inner peace has been created in human beings, it can be maintained through serenity, for this is a skill that can be learnt, which helps human beings to achieve a calm and balanced state of consciousness, and enables them to maintain inner peace, regardless of the ups and downs of life. This is because when everything is going good, everything is fine, but also when it does not feel that way. Practicing peace and recognizing it leads human beings to where true love also is. The human being, by applying the steps of peace in everyday life, will experience its fullness and understand the different efforts and strategies to be taken to prevent conflicts, because a real and good stability of peace prevents disputes. The truth is that there is only a positive true peace on earth, when all human beings on earth find justice and truth, and create peace within themselves, and between all human beings in every country. Only a stress-free state of true freedom and pure positive peace offers tranquility and security, as well as no fighting or war, for only true peace gives perfect harmony, freedom, and coexistence in unity, justice, hope, love, courage, forgiveness, and truth. Peace is a state of clear mind and absolute reason that resolves vicious conflicts without violence, allowing human beings to live in dignity and freedom. Peace simply explained means there is no revolt and no war. Peace means that human beings can live in security, without fear of violence and strife, without lying, hatred, falsehood, lies and deceit, thievery, robbery, injustice, war and revenge. Peace is a calm state of true harmony in which hostility and violence are absent. In the social sense, peace usually also means the absence and therefore the absence of any conflict, as well as fear and violence between individuals or groups. Peace is a state of harmony, in which hostility and revolt are void and absent. Consequently, there is no war, and no social grievances, and therefore also no difference between rich and poor. In its true sense, peace usually means the absence of conflict, but also the freedom from violence between individuals or groups. True peace refers to a state that does not allow any differences or even disputes to arise. If only pseudo-peace prevails, such as after a dispute or war etc., which is determined by victors, then this never equates to true and genuine peace, because there is always coercion behind it. This coercion also continues to prevail when, after a certain period of time, the sham peace or victor's pieces is cancelled. This is because the power obsessed of the previously defeated will then inevitably rise up and take the helm of the government, and seize the might that has been granted to them or that they have arrogated to themselves, consequently, issuing new laws and ordinances, regulations and provisions according to their whims and fancies, which they declare to be necessary and plausible, and make believe to the people for an affirmative vote or simply impose them in a self-imposed populist or dictatorial manner. This is contrary to the will of the people, who are either humiliated or fearful, or also indifferent and irresponsible, and allow everything to happen to them. Power-obsessed government leaders, however, always have lowly, intelligent, and simple-minded followers and supporters from among the people, so that any reasonable and non-violent resistance is omitted, and the true freedom of the people's citizenship and their rights as human beings can even remain for centuries, and be abused and enforced by the rulers, up to and including the obligation and compulsion to join the country's own military or murder organization in order to murder and destroy on command and be killed themselves. This while the culpable ones who give the order squat somewhere safe and secure and enjoy life to the full, instead of being on the front line themselves and beating each other's skulls bloody, and thus coming to the use of clear minds and grasping reason. Between individual unreasonable persons as well as between groups or states, strife, quarreling, and greed for land or power should never be allowed. Consequently, all disputes should be dealt with by neutral thinking persons on the basis of understanding and reason, laws and rights, absolutely without violence, so that everything is settled peacefully. Peace, seen from a purely humanly reasonable point of view, from which, unfortunately, the majority of all those politicians are to be excluded who are not amenable to peace, logic, understanding and reason, etc., but who are only orientated towards might, wealth, lust for power, revenge and righteousness, etc., and oppress those who are not of the same mind among them, is a state of understanding and reason, to which it is logical to see and say, 1. Peace is nonviolence, knows no wars, no armed conflicts, no strife, neither hatred nor revenge nor retaliation, no physical threat or menace, no violence, neither lies nor deceit, nor aggression of any wise. 2. Peace is structural justice, and the elimination of poverty and discrimination, as well as the strict avoidance of any kind of conflict, but also the absolute and just recognition of the absolute equality of all human beings, as well as their gender and sexual orientation. And peace requires equal opportunities, which also includes the abolition of all inequalities and injustices. 3. Peace requires inner peace and harmony, and thus also personal and general harmony in all relationships, as well as absolute security in one's own and wider environment everywhere, without fear of any things or events, disputes or injustice. 4. Peace is based on a process of self-knowledge, and the fulfillment of the conditions of true behavior and pacifist coexistence. Which means that peace is not a static state, but an active process that always requires dialogue, as well as the promotion and fulfillment of the rule of law, democracy, and all human rights. 5. Peace means averting, omitting, and preventing all direct and indirect, visible, tangible, hidden, secret, sensitive, emotional, and also subterranean violence. 6. Peace includes, at all times, and in all situations, the complete prevention of all forms of structural violence, as well as the elimination of even the slightest hint of violence, but also the building and creation of a just, harmonious, and equal society in which all human beings can fulfill their potential. But now, Quetzal, it is time for me to come back to my office, because I have something else there that I want to give you to read, which deals with exactly what I was just talking about, which is peace, but in the form of showing war for the evil that it really is.
Then let us really go back now, whereas I am sore about what you are going to give me to read.
You will see.
Here we are.
Yeah, I am sure Michael is disappointed. But here's what I want you to read.
Elsa Mittmansgruber has the following to say on 19th of December 2005. On 20, journalist, sociologist, mum of three presenter, producer/journalist at Selbstständig.
It always shocks me to the core that there are human beings who not only do not oppose a war in Central Europe, but are openly in favor of it. A hot war in our midst. This thought makes me sadly angry and speechless, because I seriously ask myself, how do these human beings actually imagine war? Would they send their own children to war? Would they accept being bombed, maimed, or killed? Would they go themselves? Would they sacrifice their neighbors' children? Whose blood is supposed to flow here? There is nothing heroic about war, nothing sublime, nothing glorious. This is the image we are told through propaganda, and we see it in feature films. The brave fighter who survives in the end is honored, gets the beautiful wife. But that is not the reality. The reality of war is dirt, fear, pain, screams, torn bodies, destroyed souls. It is hunger, cold traumas, mass graves. But you do not see this reality. You see numbers. You hear about hundreds of thousands of millions of dead, and it remains abstract. A number, something that no longer touches you. It is not the war rhetoric of the mighty that leaves me stunned. The politicians, the business community, those who profit without ever going to the front themselves. I am shocked by the fact that completely normal human beings from the center of society are calling for war. Human beings who have never experienced one themselves. They fall for crude war propaganda. Enemy images, hero myths, moral blackmail, artificially constructed threat scenarios. A language that dehumanizes, that dulls, that prepares. Many of them simply have no idea what war really means. They only know it from films, from the news, from history books that do not tell us the whole truth. A distorted, false image. They do not know what they are facing. They do not know what they are asking for. And then there are those who I wonder if they are already so empty or destroyed inside that they also want to destroy others. Human beings for whom their own lives mean so little that the lives of others also have no value. Who are waiting for day X to finally commit violence? There are also human beings like that. There is no other way I can explain how people can want a war. A war is not necessary, not here, not now, not for us. And those who are now clamoring for war among the people will not be the winners. The winners will be those who instigate it, those who sit in might, who enrich themselves, who will never fight themselves. They will have the last laugh. The people, on the other hand, will be left with death, suffering, and destruction, with nothing else. I really wonder what these human beings are hoping for. Freedom? Security? Meaning. They fall for stories of duty and strength. And far too few pause for thought. Far too few are sensitive enough to recognize what is happening here. That they are simply useful idiots. Perhaps it is simply something deeply human. Our history is repeatedly overshadowed by G-Vault and by human beings calling for war and blood. But it is still infinitely sad that we seem to have learnt nothing from it to this day. I do not want war. I do not want sacrificed children. I do not want profit from suffering. I want peace. And I will not stop saying that. Even if I am attacked and fought for it. I know that today those who want peace are portrayed as right-wing extremists. but people think about it.
What this woman writes effectively corresponds to what should be submitted to all humanity on Earth. All respect for this woman.
I also think so. But it will not do much good for the majority of Earthlings, because many are already going stupid and becoming unfit to live, and not just the drug addicts. It is also the case, as I know from you, that many human beings have been going stupid for a long time because they have been vaccinated as a result of the corona rampantly spreading disease, and their brains have been attacked as a result. This mainly affects the thalamus, in which the creative energetic consciousness and unconscious, as well as the physical consciousness and subconscious, are located. The whole process of dumbing down takes place through the vaccine, which is a substance or poison that strongly impairs consciousness and the thalamus, and which gradually causes dumbing down. You do not know whether this is added intentionally or unintentionally, because you only know that this substance is contained in the injections because you have analyzed it in detail. It is clear that you are not doing anything about it, because your directives.
Yes. You know?
I know that. And it is not a reproach, because I agree with it, because breaking the directives would most certainly bring catastrophic consequences for you and your Federation, and even probably for the whole Onkar universe. And that is to be avoided at all costs.
Consequently, we also have nothing further to talk about.
Of course not. But then I would like to make it clear, which I have done before, that it has always been difficult for me that people want to see or assume something very special in me, which I really am not, because my humble self is nothing more than a human being like everyone else. I am effectively not interested, and again I want to say this clearly, because I have had another telephonate of elevation, that I am really neither more important than any other human being, nor, somehow anything other than just Billy and a normal human being, and not something special. What is important is only the teaching of Nokodemion that I pass on, never my personality. This should finally be accepted and understood, for I am simply a messenger of the teaching, but nothing more, not even a teacher, for such a person is trained, while I have only been taught by Svath, and am therefore also a student, as whom I pass on as teaching what I have been taught by Svath. And to have been taught is something different from having studied or completed the teaching of a teacher. What I do is actually just proclaiming the teaching, nothing more. And that has nothing to do with being a prophet, as I was initially accused of being when I began my mission. This also applies to the fact that I was or am never a prophet, because I mention things and also events related to or referring to the future that have effectively happened or will happen. These were and have never been prophecies, and therefore, not prophecies, which also cannot be called prophetic now and in the future, because all my statements for the future were and are what I have seen, experienced and told on my journeys into the future with Svath, and, possibly, continue to do so if I find it necessary. Consequently, I pass on what I have seen, heard and experienced, which is therefore never prophetic, and I am not and never have been a prophet. This should now finally be realized, and I should not be called a prophet. But this designation should be forgotten. In the past, when I started my mission as a proclaimer, people simply used terms that were common but wrong for what I was doing. In the meantime, however, all human beings who are concerned with the teaching of Nokodemio, whose wise words I am proclaiming and spreading, have become so knowledgeable and understanding that we can dispense with the old, which was obviously misunderstood, due to the use of completely wrong terms and words.
Your words in the learner's mind and reason. So tell her for what you have explained corresponds to what really was and is.
Nay, we say in the understanding ear, but what you say, that is a word which says precisely what ought to be.
However, that is not the same thing.
Correct. But it does specify exactly what it is supposed to. Then I would like to give you this, here, on the computer to read, which I think is an important question and answer, which I would also like to add to this conversation with you, in the report. If I get permission from Elizabeth and Maria and Wolfgang. Arbird Poet.
Question from Maria and Wolfgang Friedel.
We also read a section of Billy's book every day, and as you have already noticed, some questions arise for us, which we naturally try to answer by thinking and searching, and yet sometimes there are leftovers that remain unanswered. While reading the book Lehrschrift für die Lehre der Wahrheit, we came across the topic of reincarnation of the human creation life energy again. On page 117, Billy gives the answer to this, and it is actually very clear. When the video What the School Does Not Tell You About Death and What Comes Afterwards was released, the statements about the reincarnation of the human creation life energy were different in some respects. Now the question is, can the creation life energy reincarnate everywhere and in every part of the world and among all peoples? Or actually according to its state of evolution, that is to say a more evolved form will not reincarnate where it has no opportunity to develop further? That would be a good question.
To answer your question, I have the following considerations, which I will also submit to Billy for his assessment of their correctness. Elizabeth was in the video. What the school keeps from you regarding the so-called reincarnation of the creation energy life form is explained in detail. Everything is correct. These videos are always submitted to Billy before publication, to check the correctness of the content. Apart from this, it should only be noted that according to the latest information in relation to creation energy teaching, there is no talk of reincarnation, and therefore rebirth of the creation life energy, but of revitalization. However, all the statements in the video What the School Is Not Telling You do not contradict Billy's statements in the book. Lehrschrift, point no. 117. There are several important points to bear in mind. As already mentioned several times, the content of creation energy teaching was and is constructed and taught by Billy in such a way that it is always adapted to the progress in the development of understanding, reason, logic, comprehension, and therefore the possibility of the student's correct and valuable processing ability. This is the only way to ensure that, on the one hand, students are not overtaxed and, on the other, that they do not simply consume the subject matter, but rather develop the necessary logic through their own conscious and thoroughly strenuous and painstaking mental work. According to the advanced evolutionary stage of development of the students, creation energy teaching now increasingly provides far-reaching information that would not have been understood in the past. In principle, of course, the law of creation always behaves in such a way that the evolutionary progress of human beings is always decisive in all material life cycles of the respective personalities. Due to the massive overpopulation, however, everything has become completely confused, and the course of the incarnation cycle, according to the law of creation, which would normally take place with a population of around 500 million human beings on Earth, can no longer be used as a yardstick due to the exploding overpopulation. Billy refers to the normal case, that is to say, to an evolutionary development in a world with a population density adapted to this. When he answers the question in the teaching, when he says that a highly developed creation, life, energy form, and the associated material block of consciousness will never animate a personality in an underdeveloped people that does not correspond to the level of consciousness of the personality. Due to overpopulation, everything behaves differently on our Earth, which means that each personality, when its turn comes, can animate a newly conceived human being anywhere and in any culture. However, it has no relevant effect on the general evolutionary progress where and in which cultural group a new personality incarnates. This is also because in every civilization and in every culture we find the necessary conditions for what can bring us forward evolutionarily. This again for the reason that the greatest endeavor of the world's population on Earth should be to become true human beings in themselves, which does not essentially culminate in technical or futuristic knowledge and achievements of all kinds, but in building up true human values. It is therefore irrelevant where and in which environment the incarnation of the next new personality takes place, because everywhere there is the possibility that true human values, such as compassion, modesty, tolerance, understanding, justice, peacefulness, and also helpfulness, and much more can be learnt. Then there is the essential point from the new information that we human beings decide for ourselves from the very beginning, that is to say, as soon as we are born, unconsciously at first, whether in what we accept from our environment, from parents and siblings, from grandparents, etc., adopt and make our own of all the thoughts and behaviors that are exemplified to us. According to our latest teachings, there is therefore no external education, as we have understood it up to now, because each individual personality always decides for itself what it might adopt from the influences of its environment, and what it blocks out inwardly, and goes its own way. A personality with an evolutionarily more highly developed form of creation life energy is also, due to its power and strength, increasingly able to pay attention to its own unconscious evolutionary impulses and live according to them in order to protect itself from harmful environmental influences. Since we human beings bear full responsibility for our own lives, it is basically only logical for me that parents and other human beings are not responsible for what we will become in later life, and that we are completely helplessly exposed to the value of upbringing and its weal and woe, depending on the general view. The fundamentally decisive factor lies in how self-education is carried out, if it is tackled at all. The fact that it is hardly, if ever, tackled by the majority of the population is becoming more and more apparent to us, because unfortunately the situation in our world is very bad in this respect, with lazy thinking, manipulability, pleasure-seeking, illusory thinking, faith, indifference, and much more prevailing, which means that all the devastating effects are already pre-programmed.
That roughly coincides with what you were talking about earlier. Elizabeth's answer here is good, correct, and appropriate. It is probably correct that it is also recorded here at the conversation if you get permission.
I just think so, because it also corresponds to the necessity.
Then I have my duty again, but I want to be back here tomorrow at about 9:00h to start dictating the conversation I recorded today, because I think that what was spoken is worthy of a conversation report.
That may be.
I think so, as I said before. But now goodbye, Edward, my friend.
Then take care. See you tomorrow. Then bye, Quetzal. See you tomorrow, my friend.
Sunday the 28th of December, 2025, 8:57 hours.
There you are already, my friend. Greetings.
Greetings also, Edward.
Last night Michael and I were still doing the emails, and a few minutes ago I checked to see if there was already a reply from Elizabeth regarding her answer. That is indeed the case, so I can put everything in place.
Your comments are really valuable.
Precisely. Therefore, it is probably correct that I insert them.
Then I will now begin dictating my notes from yesterday.
You can, but first I still have this. If you can please read what is written here in the paper.
If it good, it is a bit much, but
Well, what do you say to that?
you call the European Union an EU dictatorship, and that actually corresponds to what it really also is, although it is absolutely incomprehensible to me that all the leaders and peoples of the member states do not realize this. Everything about the Nazi-like dictatorship is so obvious. If this dictatorship is scrutinized at its core, then a pronounced Nazi ideology is so clearly pronounced among the key leaders and their supporters, and so recognizable as the most important endeavor that absolutely no doubts can arise. There is also a fundamental old-fashioned hatred of Russia, which has also been transferred to the few righteous, deserving politicians who are neutral and behave accordingly since the founding of this dictatorship organization. Consequently, they also make reasonable statements towards Russia in accordance with their balanced, neutral attitude and endeavor to act accordingly. However, this is not possible for all the Nazi-minded people in Brussels as a whole, nor for the top leaders of all European states, whereby during my investigations in Brussels and also in Germany. I was able to identify mainly 3 German-born women as ringleaders who harbor their Nazi sentiments against Russia and insidiously and subtly indoctrinate all the EU organization leaders and their employees to become enemies of Russia, without them realizing it themselves. The same is also the case in Germany, where the Chancellorship and its staff have been secretly, and without exception, infiltrated with Nazi sentiments, which is why the Chancellor has fraternally pledged absolute and constant help and loyalty to the corrupt state of Ukraine, and thus to the war-mongering and corrupt leader Zelensky. And the fact that this is happening to the same extent in the leaderships of European states and also in parts of the population corresponds to a fact that cannot be dismissed out of hand. As you say, in each case with reference to things that effectively correspond to the truth. I do not think it is necessary to say any more about this, because
it would be pointlessly carrying water into the Rhine again anyway, as I have said elsewhere. But the fact that the majority of human beings do not think for themselves, in order to abolish this mendacious, deceitful and power-hungry EU dictatorship, is not enough for the Earthling's intellect and reason. This little article in the newspaper with the title proves just how lowly intelligent the majority is. Guardian.
Protection from assassination.
The National Council recently heard Tamara Funicello loudly criticize that sheep in Switzerland are better protected than women. I doubt whether the statement is valid. After all, more sheep have been killed by wolves in recent years than women. Well, she's also not talking about that, but about money that the federal government should spend, and that is something we can talk about. Something else that she does not take into account gives me more food for thought. In Switzerland, women and also sheep are much better protected than embryos in the womb. In other words, little human beings with everything that belongs to life. They have no lobby in the federal parliament, not even Tamara. Their disappearance is without cost. No police report them as missing. But there are legions of human beings who are killed before they are even born without being asked. Even if we were only a product of evolution, a human being would still be a human being. But we are created and personally planned by the genius designer, each and every one of us. He knew us before the earth existed. And he wants a relationship and exchange with us. That is what we were created for. If we enter into a relationship with him, the address is Jesus Christ. Then we are much better protected than all the sheep and women in the world. Because he knew us personally even before we were born, and has a good plan for our future, together with him.
This was written by a man for a newspaper that published it here.
Are you serious? And that was actually written in this newspaper. That cannot be true, that a newspaper.
But it is, because apparently the editors of this paper are religious, and the man, that is quite clear, who wrote this, that is also clear to understand, he is irredeemably a believer, and therefore not capable of seeing and recognizing what effectively corresponds to reality and truth. But he just idiotically believes in a dear God, which however does not exist. Reality and truth are obviously not important to him, but only faith, because he does not have to think for himself, and also does not have to think about anything, but can simply eat everything by faith that is lied to him. So he can interpret everything according to his erroneous and confused belief, just as he wants to see and understand it. I also think that the man is somehow irresponsible and insane, because what he writes about embryos and the dear God, with regard to human beings supposedly conceived and pre-planned by God, etc., corresponds to absolutely insane, sick thinking, beliefs, and absolute nonsense, as well as very clearly a religious delusion. This proves that any rational self-thinking on the part of the man is so overlaid by the religious delusion of faith that neither understanding nor reason have a chance of ever breaking through. The man is actually to be pitied, but that does not mean that he can move on from his misguided belief to the truth. We should not be surprised that there is rampant overpopulation, which is turning the planet nature, its fauna and flora, and all life in general into a pig and wiping it out with its evil might. The delusional belief that an imaginary, insane God is supposed to have nonsensically said, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over all the creatures that creep on the earth." Genesis 28. That is probably the height of all imbecility. And this population will continue to grow, even though the Earth is already overpopulated by more than 9.53 billion Earthlings, and in 3 to 4 years at the turn of the year, there will be around 10 billion. The world population clock counts completely wrong, because it only shows around 8.3 billion, while in reality, at the end of last year, that is to say at the beginning of 2025, there were already 9.539,918,089 billion Earth humans. This means that the old and no longer valid world population clock incorrectly calculates the number of Earthlings at only around 8.3 billion, which means that by the end of this year the Earth's population will have increased by around 100 million, which will still have to be added this year, because the Earth's population growth is to be calculated by around 100 million per year. This means that by the end of the year the overpopulation figure will be around 9.63 billion or so, which is around 100 million more than the world population clock is currently counting. And what really very bad things have come about as a result of this extremely large mass of humanity, all over the world, and through the fault of the absolutely irresponsible, crazy old German chancellor, who delusionally brought the refugee welcome culture into being, has resulted and continues to result from the waves of refugees, from the poor southern countries to the rich northern countries of the earth, whereby many thousands of such economic refugees have died so far. But the irresponsible ex-chancellor does not care about that, because on the contrary, she is apparently still proud of the fact that many thousands of refugees have lost their lives through her fault.
As to what the state of overpopulation is at the end of this year, I will bring you our exact calculation figure on the 1st of January 2026, but you should simply add it to this conversation afterwards. Consequently, I will not have to dictate another conversation to you then.
Good. Thank you. That is also quite right, and that is fine then.
That is so according to every belief and proves that just as when the operation of an apparatus no longer works and it can no longer be controlled, in human beings, understanding and reason are completely suspended in their workings by faith and can no longer fulfill their purpose.
Interesting comparison, but plausible.
But now I want to dictate because that is what I came here to do. Oh yes, my friend on Arrow was able to tell me that our knowledge sphere, as you always call it, is 364 meters in diameter and 364 meters in height according to earthly measurements.
Then I missed by quite a bit, because Michael asked me. I said that I estimated a length of at least 300 meters.
That is nothing more, because you did not measure the object yourself. But now, my friend, I really want to dictate.
Good. I have no more questions.
The 1st of January 2026 at 0200 hours.
According to the latest census calculation of the Pleuron, the number of increase of the Earth's population per year 2025 is 116,386,017. Consequently, the latest level of overpopulation on Earth on the 31st of December 2025 at 24.00 hours is 9,656,304,106 human beings. The statements of so-called experts, politicians, scientists and sociologists, etc., that birth rates are too low and that more offspring urgently need to be produced and raised should not be trusted under any circumstances. In third world countries in particular, the annual increase in population due to new births is already immeasurable. Only in a few industrialist countries is the fertility rate births per woman declining, but this is in no wise sufficient to significantly reduce or even stop overpopulation. The political interest in increasing birth rates, which is also increasingly being propagated in industrialist countries, may be justified on the one hand by the prospect of higher tax revenues, but on the other hand also by the fact that belligerent countries and countries willing to wage war want to be concerned about the necessary human supply early enough.